Salutations, ladies and gentlemen, the Knife Raven here, back again with another video, and in today's video I will be taking a look at a very interesting little knife from a company that I have yet to, well, discuss anything from. And this is Claude Dozorme. Now, Claude Dozorme is a French knife maker located in Thiers, and from what I can tell, they make some very interesting knives that are pairing old school patterns with modern materials and design features. And this particular piece is one of their cheaper models, as a lot of their knives are quite expensive. But this is called the Capucin. And the Capucin is a typical friction folder type knife. And it's one of their older models that they've been producing for, I believe, well over a decade at least. That's as far as the YouTube videos go back. I don't know how long they really have been making this for, but they have been around for long enough now that this isn't anything new. Now, this is the box the knife came in. Simple cardboard with the logo and the name, Claude Dozorme, and they have been making knives since 1902. This was, again, bought from Heine Haynes. And this is the Capucin olive, and it also lets you know that here and here as well. So this is indeed the olive wood model, and I had heard reports of a couple people getting juniper when they were supposed to get olive, and so I wasn't sure if that was going to happen, and I wouldn't have been disappointed had it happened, but this is indeed the olive. And included with the box you have this little sheet here, which has a description on the Capucin, all in French, so naturally, if you can translate that or understand it, by all means, pause and read ahead. And on the other side, we have a brief description of the company, Claude Dozorme. So there you are. And here is the knife. This is a substantial knife. It's quite large. I wouldn't call it cumbersome by any means, but it definitely isn't, well, it isn't a small vest pocket knife. This is a large working folder, and it's a very interesting design, and I wouldn't put it too far away from the similar curved shape of a la guiole, although a bit broader. It's one piece of wood, you can see, nice olive wood grain, with these dark streaks here. And on the other side, much simpler grain, but I'd still say it is quite attractive. We have a steel pin going through there, and this, which I suppose I'd call the main pivot. And there's also this little part here with these two little holes, and this will be important shortly, and I'll get into why that's there. But beforehand, having a quick look at the fit and finish, the centering is a little bit off. Don't know if that could be corrected, but it's not rubbing, so I'm not going to complain about it, but just a tiny bit off. It's a friction folder, so again, it's hard to point out anything when it comes to gapping, as there is no gapping on a knife like this. The wood is smooth. I have heard of a couple people getting theirs with little chips and dents in the wood, but no such issue is presented here. But we have a little cutout for the nail, but there's clearly a lot of blade sticking out, so you can pinch this open with relative ease. And what's interesting is I don't know what the exact designation for this knife would be. It isn't a perfect friction folder, and it isn't a slip joint either. But there is a spring on the inside, and a little stop pin. Now, the action is still very much akin to a friction folder, but it does seem like there is a little bit of snap, which would not occur in a typical friction folder, so I don't really know how to classify this. I think it would almost be a bit closer to a slip joint. But it's a very interesting design. And we have the I believe it's called the sage leaf or a skein-do type of blade here, kind of like an aggressive spear point. It's a very old blade shape, and it comes with a bit of a satin finish with the logo, Claude Dozorme, Fabrique en France. And again, nothing on this side of the blade. I believe the stainless here is 8CRM10V. I never can remember the name of that steel, but part of me is skeptical of that description, as I wouldn't be surprised if this is 12C27 Sandvik, which is more typical in a traditional French knife. And while, don't quote me on that, I know it's stainless steel, I'm not sure exactly which steel it is. I've heard it is the CRM10 whatever, but at the same time, I'm pretty sure I also heard this was 12C27. So again, take that with a grain of salt. I'm not entirely sure what the steel is, but regardless, it's going to be a softer steel. It's easy to sharpen, but won't hold an edge for a terribly long amount of time. The edge, speaking of which, is by no means a razor, but I wouldn't say it's blunt either. Decent edge, but could use with a touch-up. Blade stock will probably come in at around a good 2 millimeters, so pretty typical. And I believe this is flat ground, although you may be able to correct me on that, as I can't tell. That could be some form of... I don't believe that's a convex. I think that's a flat grind. But again, very thin edge. There is no blade play on this knife, but what was interesting is the knife came with blade play. Now, why isn't there any issue with that now? Well, that brings me to this here that I was showcasing earlier. And with this, the knife also includes this little tool. And whether you want to call it a key or not, you can just take this and put these two little notches in here, and you can loosen or tighten the pivot to your preference. So here it is, much looser. You can see. Now there is some blade wobble. However, take the key again, give it a tighten, and the blade play is gone, but also the action is considerably stiffer. Now, I wouldn't say this is a perfect mechanism, but I do quite like it when a knife offers a certain degree of personal choice in the action, as there have been many cases where I've had knives that are either too tight or too loose, and there's nothing you can really do to change that fact. And in this case, you can not only remedy the blade play issue, but you can also judge whether you think the knife is too easy to open or too stiff, and you can adjust it yourself. And I think that's a very nice little touch. Considering this knife cost, I think, around 35... Is it around 35 pounds, maybe a little bit less? So at around the 30-pound mark, this is by no means a bad knife. And it's very simple, but very comfortable in hand. Again, I will do a size comparison here. Well, maybe less a comparison, more a measurement. We have an overall length of just a little under 8 3/4 inches. So that's already giving you an idea of the size of this knife. The blade is coming in just under 4 inches, and the cutting edge is sitting at 3.5. So this is not a UK legal piece, even though it is not a lockback. It's quite large, and when I first saw this, my immediate thought was that would make for a very good salami and cheese knife. And I think that that would be a very fair assessment. Blades with these kinds of thin edges and simple, easy to sharpen steels are generally fairly good for food prep, and I find that that's a use that a lot of my knives are given, and I wouldn't be surprised if this also took on that role. But for an everyday carry knife, I don't know if I'd say this is a knife I would recommend over perhaps an Opinel, as the size really is, it is large. It's a very lightweight knife, as again, there's very little metal on it. It's primarily a single piece of wood, but despite that, it is still a large knife. So even if you aren't going to feel it weighing you down, you may still need large pockets to put this in. But if you're okay with that, and you don't mind the fact that it doesn't have a clip or anything like that, and you just are willing to shove this into a pocket and carry it around with you, then by all means, this would be a very nice, simple knife to carry about. I think my favorite aspect, aside from just the simplistic look of it, would be the grip that this knife has. You get an easy 4 fingers on it, which isn't surprising based on the size, and the shape and contouring of the handle is incredibly comfortable. There are no uneven or unsanded edges, everything feels smooth, and really just the whole knife fits into the hand very, very well and provides a very comfortable grip. So I wouldn't say this is a hard use knife or anything you'd be really putting in a lot of work with, but if you're worried about a knife feeling secure in the hand, regardless of hand size, this is a very comfortable knife and one that I would say is quite secure. So overall, I don't have a lot to say about this knife. Again, this is my first knife from Claude Dozorme, and I must say I'm impressed. For this price point, I can excuse the slightly offset blade and the perhaps not a straight razor edge, but overall, this is a very nice knife for what it's trying to do. And my assumption is that this would be a knife marketed to those who are, again, looking for a larger knife that still preserves a certain simplicity and traditional style, or perhaps those interested in pocket knives for food prep. And when I first saw this, my immediate comparison, and I'm sure many others have thought of this too, is the Sword peasant knife. And I've yet to get one of those. They're, I believe, from New Zealand. But if you've ever seen a sword with the wooden handle, it's very easy to see the similarities here. And the old version of this knife actually had a more typical friction folder mechanism, where instead of having a spring here, this was just an empty cutout, and there was an extended tang part of the blade, and you could use it similar to the, I believe it's called a cutlery on a Higo no Kami, and you could use it to essentially one-hand open the knife. And that is something that the Sword Peasant also features. So I didn't get that model, and I don't know if they're still making that. Perhaps that was the older variation and this is the newer model. But regardless, I still think that I can see the similarity, and chances are this would be a similar knife in terms of the purpose, as the Sword Peasant is really just a general purpose knife. It's very traditional, very robust, very rustic, and this by all means would fill those same roles. So there you are. There is the Claude Dozorme Capucin in olive wood. Very impressive little knife. I'd give it a good 8 out of 10. Again, it's a little bit large, but it's very lightweight. It's very pretty. I wouldn't say it's threatening despite its large size. And overall, I'd recommend this. So if you're looking for a French knife that isn't an open L because you want something different, this is one to look into. So there you are. And this is the Knife Raven, as always, signing off. Goodbye.